Kelly, and we are going to be recording this for posterity. Um, well, I'd like to welcome you today, welcome you to Tales from the Archives, Archive Stories, and today we're calling it Stranger Tales. We actually have actually done this in the past with ghost stories for Halloween, and that's been a lot of fun. And this year we're doing Stranger Tales. And I'm going to share some interesting stories about Pensacola and things in the area that come from the archive, from newspaper clippings, from reports, from other kinds of things. What we do know about Pensacola is that it is an ancient city. It's in the heart of the city lies St. Michael's Cemetery. In this photograph from around 1910, 1918 period is what St. Michael Cemetery looked like. And a visitor in 1909 wrote, "Here the dead lie sealed in ruined tombs built in past centuries. Candles are burned each Halloween to light Candles are burned each Halloween to light the way for the departed soul who may wish to pay a midnight call to their discarded self. It is an eerie spot. On windy nights the gnarled oaks toss their long beards of moss, and dismal sighs haunt the cemetery. In the older half, tangles of grass and ivy mingle with the crosses, the artificial wreaths, and broken vases. Each burial is a permanent record of the love and heartache, success and failure, happiness and grief, and some of these spirits and feelings linger after death, returning to the home, businesses, and streets that they used to frequent in life, and now stalk after death. And for our first stranger tale that we're going to talk about today, it's called The Goon of Guillemard. And it is about a monster that slithered onto the street from a manhole cover at Guillemard and Romana Street in Pensacola in February of 1938 and began terrorizing the residents of North Hill, especially in the area of North DeVilliers Street. This is a drawing roughly of the area that the creature impacted. It's described as having fang claws, and it came out and skulked the dark streets of Pensacola. Now, the police headquarters in February of 1938 began getting lots of phone calls, some claiming to have seen this creature chase people, others wanting to know if there really was a monster on the street. To understand Pensacola at this time in 1938, you have to understand that many of the mansions and big homes in North Hill and even that were still in downtown employed African Americans as servants, as maids, gardeners, drivers, and other occupations. And after a day shift, many of these employees then returned to their home in the Delmont and DeVilliers neighborhood. But as bad news of the monster spread, they began being reluctant to come out at night. And they talked to their employers about maybe staying overnight just in case, or leaving early while the streets were still light, and so forth. And of course, in February, darkness came very early. And so there are reported sightings of the monster in various areas. And I've got four of them here. One of them was St. Michael Cemetery, said they saw the monster in St. Michael Cemetery. They saw him at another location. And two police officers were assigned to investigate this goon of Guillemard. Today, Guillemard Street doesn't stretch all the way down to Romana. It's a narrow street that starts at Wright Street and then goes north, and it's broken by the interstate. In fact, where it extends, where it would have extended in the old days, is all torn up and taken up by Interstate 110. So it's only a short area, but that area behind the First Baptist Church and the First Methodist Church, that area was also where the Pensacola water plants were and purification, and so So sewers are big there, and they connect to different things. Two police officers, motorcycle officer George White and C.A. Green, interviewed a lot of people on this, and they deduced that the goon was reported to have the head of a panther, body like a gorilla, 6 legs, hands that drug on the ground, and it stood about 4 feet high. It left tracks like a grizzly bear and makes noise like a foghorn. It's liable to attack by coming out of a sewer or jumping from a rooftop or the top of a tree. One person reported its presence in Kuprian Park, where it chased 2 boys. Another reported it in St. Michael Cemetery. One reported having seen it grab a dog and break a poor dog in two like a rag doll. Now, the police took notice that the growing reports had emptied the streets of Pensacola, that they were quiet at dark for the first time in years. There were no fights, there were no card games, there were no people spilling out of bars. One judge reported his washerwoman told him she missed Wednesday night church for the first time in 12 years. And at first, the newspaper and the white community sort of made fun of these stories. They seemed to affect only the African American community, but that changed. That changed 2 days after the first newspaper reporting, when they started getting countless reports from citizens all over the city. As the paper reported, the side monster rumors grew more lurid with every hour. Police chased every clue with no results, and it may have been linked to the Mobile monster of Fisher Alley, who appeared in January 23, 1938, and terrorized northern Mobile, city of Mobile. It claimed to have come out of the swamps of Mobile Bay, and it attacked animals and the like. And this led to armed and torch-bearing groups of African Americans roaming the streets of northern Mobile at night to protect the citizens. On February 13th, the creature in Mobile was caught and shot. Turned out to be a large otter with a fierce disposition, weighed 30 pounds, was some 4 feet long. And this may have been the start of the Pensacola rumor, the idea that it had moved to new stalking ground, but we really don't know. There is speculation that the creature still lurks beneath the streets of Pensacola. Gouliamard today is not the street it was in 1938, as I mentioned. It's shorter. But where the street lies, again, where the water treatment plants, water storage areas, and it came from the stewards there, it may still be there slumbering, growing hungrier and hungrier. But thankfully there is much more, so much more food for it today. The next, and if 1938 with the goon of Gouliamard was not bad enough, on October 1938, emanating from CBS radio studios in New York City, was a broadcast of the Mercury Theater. This was an on-air live broadcast that used actors and speakers to give plays and performance. And they decided to do a live on-air dramatic broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And the radio program, people missed the first part. They turned on the radio late, and they missed the first part, saying you're listening to a theatrical production. But they turned it on, they heard dance music, and that was normal on an evening for the radio. They would broadcast dance music from many of the dance studios and jazz places in New York City. And so they would be listening to jazz, and all of a sudden it got interrupted with an interview with a Princeton astronomer who was noting that he was observing large explosion on the surface of Mars. And then they went back to the music, and then they came back and they reported they had reports of a large meteor falling at Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And then from then on, panic ensued. Because H.G. Wells' story is about the Martians emerging from the meteor, from the flying saucers that landed, and growing and tall, and becoming tall as skyscrapers, and wading across the Hudson from the burning smoke of destroying New Jersey and start destroying New York City. And they just began doing these as like matter-of-fact news broadcasts between these accounts of music, and people began to get very panicked. The telephone switchboards at CBS were jammed with people calling, and it got more frightening. And people did not realize they would rush from their house, they'd get in the car. One One lady said, I tuned in when the weather reports were given. I was with my little boy. My husband was at the movie. I thought it was all up with if I grabbed my boy and just sat and cried. Now, CBS tried to air short spots, assuring listeners that this was just a radio drama, but that didn't stop it. And the Halloween newspapers on October 31st, 38 had headlines about the fake radio thing stirred terror through the United States. And the weird thing was there really was a Grover's Mill in New Jersey. And the setting of the radio play Wilson Farm, well, there really was a Wilson Farm also. And at Wilson Farm, the Martian came up from the pit and proceeded to destroy everything. And of course, the radio interrupted its broadcast by saying, Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue our broadcast from Grover's Mill, which of course exclaimed to everybody thinking the world was coming to an end. And the papers the next day were full of these stories. And that happened in Pensacola. WCAO radio got dozens of calls. People called the police station. One person said that they thought their only delight was that the Martian came to Stelton, her town. She wouldn't have to pay the butcher's bill. And someone else, this was from the Pensacola Journal of October, Halloween, 1938. And it says all that people call the New Journal say where they're going to put out an extra newspaper about the thing hitting New Jersey. And the 40,000 people killed in New Jersey and Mars attacking the Earth and so forth. And it was just a frightening evening for a lot of people, and caused mass hysteria across the country. So 1938 was a banner year for Pensacola. If the Goon of Gilliamard didn't get you, certainly the Martian landing from outer space, laying waste to the city, would have wiped out the place. The 38 panic broadcasters become known, showed that the media could be a powerful tool in shaping public opinion. Not only could it bring the world to our, but it could incite panic and it could incite chaos. And at the end of the broadcast, Orson Welles said, that grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch. And if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian. It's Halloween. And that was another strange tale for Pensacola. My third strange tale is called You Rang. And most people may recognize this individual. Theodore Crawford, known as Ted Cassidy, was born July 31st, 1932 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and raised in Philippi, West Virginia. He was academically gifted, and he was on the high school and basketball and football team. Unfortunately, he was bullied quite a bit and teased because of his 6'1" height. He attended West Virginia Wesleyan College and later Stetson University, where he graduated, played for basketball for the Stetson Hatters, and he graduated with degrees in speech and drama in 1955. In 1956, he married Margaret Helen, and their son, and then he moved to Pensacola, Florida in 1957 to begin a career at WCOA Radio on January 7th, 1957, and his son Sean was born here. And he became a morning announcer. The morning announcer shift was from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock. And this was the local station. So it covered the news, the weather, Pensacola news, they features, other kinds of stuff. The city desk was crimes and events that had happened in the city. This was the station, the NBC station, that people would turn their radios on in their cars and commuting, at home, listening what's going on locally, what's going on in Pensacola. And so he became very, very, very well known during this thing. He apparently goofed around on the radio a lot too. He gave other WCOA announcers and others fake names. Don Griffith was popular. He would always introduce him as, here we go, with Anthony Fleek with our latest news. A letter writer to the News Journal complained about his antics, and she was tired of his space cadet antics. So he was doing something sci-fi on the radio. and he became quite popular. He was named the announcer for the racetrack season for the Pensacola Greyhound. He did sightseeing tours. He did interviews. He did moderation. He was MC at numerous city and county events, and he was quite well known and quite active locally. But perhaps one of the strangest tales about Ted Cassidy was in October 1960. And yeah, it's always October 1960, right? He agreed to help the Community United Way campaign raise an unprecedented $500,000. And he agreed to do it by agreeing to live 40 feet high in the air on a telephone pole at the corner of Palafox and Garden Street until he would stay there until the United Way campaign had reached its fundraising goal of $525,477. And they called it Operation Highboy. And this is a picture of Ted being raised to this 40-foot loft. He's on the left side in the picture. You can't miss that silhouette of Ted Cassidy. And his 40-foot perch, he had in the 40-foot perch a 6-foot 10-inch bed because now he was 6 foot 9 inches tall, and so the bed fit him. He had a lounge chair and a desk, and he continued doing his morning show from 6 to 9 from this location. And indeed, they've also put a telephone at the bottom of the pole so people could stop on the sidewalk and they could talk to him during the day. And he just, people would wave at him and so forth. On Thursday, he went up there on I'm not sorry, let's see, October 10th, Monday, October 10th. Um, on Thursday, after 4 days up there, he was interviewed for the newspaper. He reported he'd forgotten his razor, and so therefore he was very, very good growing a beard. He said he'd looked down on Palafox Street so long now that the people and things didn't seem out of proportion to him anymore. But he also said not everybody knew where he was. His 3-year-old son Sean and his eight-month-old daughter Charlotte obviously didn't know where he was. So on Thursday, Mrs. Cassidy brought them to the base of the telephone pole, and Ted was kind of worried because he thought his 3.5-year-old son, once he saw he was 40 foot up in the air, he would want to join him up there. The United Way campaign was a success, and on October 28th, Ted came down from his perch. You can see his silhouette on the left there. It had met a goal. He was met by the Pensacola High School band and a big cheering crowd, and everybody congratulated him, and he was very happy. Not long after this, in 1960 or 61, he left and he went to Dallas, Texas to be a disc jockey for WFAA AM radio, and for WFAA TV. They had an afternoon movie flick called Dialing for Dollars, and he portrayed Creech, an outer space character on the thing. He worked for the radio at least into the 1963. He happened to be broadcasting the day Kennedy was assassinated. He was one of the first people to interview a couple of the eyewitnesses to the assassination. He was also a talented musician, and he moonlighted at a Luby's Cafe in a Dallas shopping center. He played organ with the patron. These were all kind of foreshadowing, I realize. And then he announced in early 1964 that he would be leaving Dallas to take a role in a new television series. And thus Ted, our WQA announcer, became Lurch, the Addams Family butler, famous for saying, "You rang." Interestingly enough, he was not supposed to have any like dialogue in the Addams thing, and this came along early, and it became so popular that they left it in. And by the way, ABC deliberately filmed the Addams Family in black and white. This is a time that TV were moving into color and showing color thing, and the ABC deliberately filmed it in black and white, and that Addams Family ran for 2 TV series. He also appeared in other movies. He was in one of the first Star Trek episodes. He had bit parts many places. He did a lot of voice animation work for Hanna-Barbera Studios for dozens of their animated characters. Sadly, he died in 1946. They were removing a tumor from his heart, and he had complications from the surgery, and he passed away at age 46. And perhaps even stranger, he was cremated, buried in the yard of his home in Woodland Hill, California, and his burial has never been found. I had mentioned he was grew up in Philippi, West Virginia. And so about 3 years ago, they started having an annual Lurch Fest to celebrate their famous citizen. And so every year they have a Lurch Fest. There's a poster there from the August, a few months ago, Lurch Fest. And then there's a menu from one of the restaurants where their specials are, of course, the Lurch Burger, Uncle Fester, It Burger, The Thing, and other things. At the 2023, a few months ago, they also had Sean Cafferty, his son, visit. That's a picture of him, and he looks an awful lot like his father. And so we leave that strange tale. Then we go to my last strange tale for the day. And I call this the train of freaks that disappeared after Pensacola. On February 3rd, 1942, a picture appeared in the Pensacola Journal of Captain Rigger Jack Barnett holding a shrunken head and announcing the arrival of the Mammoth Marine Hippodrome Special Exhibition Railroad Train on February 4th, 1942. The train was a traveling sideshow. It had long cars, had a number of railroad cars. It pulled onto the siding at the L&N Depot downtown where the now abandoned Crown Hotel is. And they had various kinds of displays. They were a traveling sideshow. They had a 68-ton whale. They had deadly devilfish. They advertised having 1,040 sea terrors, for example, a mermaid, headless woman, and many other wonders. And they parked along the L&N Depot. And they would be open evenings and afternoons through Saturday. They got there on a Wednesday and they went through Saturday. This was actually a very, very busy time in Pensacola. And the reason for that is this is February of 1942. Pearl Harbor had occurred December 7th, 1941. And Pensacola was now full of servicemen who had come to Pensacola, um, training at NAF Pensacola, USO housing, and other kinds of things. In fact, the day before, February 3rd, 1942, and for February 2nd, Eleanor Roosevelt had visited Pensacola, and so the papers were full of her visit to the Naval Air Station and other places. Now, the Mammoth Marine Hippodrome had traveled through much of the western United States in the late 1930s, began in Montana, and they had different kinds of attractions that were added and then other attractions changed. And the Pensacola believers don't have much comment on this strange train. But one of the strangest features was the mermaid. This is a picture of the mermaid out of a Louisiana newspaper. Her name was Sea Tiny. Um, Sometimes she would fold these legs up under her and they would advertise her as the alligator girl. This is another ad from the Pensacola paper about her, Sea Tiny. You notice servicemen are admitted 2 for 1 on a ticket, and they advertise Ethiopia as the alligator girl. But perhaps the most frightening exhibit, the strangest tale of the train, was the headless woman. And the story goes that several years before 1936, a terrible railway tragedy occurred near Paris, France, and a woman named Nina Santata was in that accident. They found her among the dead and dying in the twisted wreckage with the bony structure of her skull horribly crushed, but she still lived. And by fortunate coincidence, the accident happened close to the private villa and research laboratory of the great neurosurgeon Dr. Joseph Behrendorff, world famous for his wonderful experiments in keeping human and animal tissue alive in chemical solution. And he thought once that her head injury could never be repaired by any surgery, but he kept her alive for 3 days with adrenaline and serum injection, and his technicians hastily constructed a marvelous apparatus that consisted of tubes that fed blood and oxygen and food and nutrients, and then he completely amputated her head and substituted this astounding machine. And so Nina Plantata was considered the eighth wonder of the world of science. And when they opened the curtains, you would see the body of the young woman, but where the head would be, the tube would extend from the body to machines that were pumping blood and fluid in and out of the body, with technicians monitoring the body. And sometimes sometimes they would show that the body still could react. They used a little electric machine and they would send electrical impulses to Nina, and her fingers would twitch, and sometimes her hand would raise and her arm would raise. And if you didn't believe she was real, that she was just a dummy, why, they would press against her skin, and it showed that a white spot would appear like you would press it against any normal skin, and then it would turn pink again where the blood rushed in. And they often let the visitors sometimes come up and touch her to prove that the body was alive. And she traveled on this train from 1938 into 1942. Was she real, or was she an illusion? No one knows. And today we talk routinely about keeping coma patients alive, but 1942, this was a strange, strange tale. And that's our last Stranger Tale from the archive for this haunting month of October. And I hope I regaled you with some of the stories that you can find if you research the archive and research the old newspaper archives that we have and other stories. And you may find stranger and even stranger tales from Pensacola and West Florida. Happy Halloween.